The flight was supposed to be ordinary. A calm mid-morning journey from Sydney to Singapore, filled with tourists, families, and business travelers. The Boeing 777-300ER gleamed under the bright Australian sun as passengers moved through the jet bridge, laughter and chatter echoing softly against the cabin walls. Among them was a quiet 19-year-old girl named Elena Foster, traveling alone for the first time in her life. She had always dreamed of flying, not as a pilot, but as a passenger, free above the clouds. She had never been inside a cockpit, never touched a control yoke, never imagined that before this flight was over, she'd be the one sitting in the captain's chair. The boarding went smoothly. Elena sat in seat 17A near the wing, with a perfect view of the runway. She wore her headphones, lost in music, trying to calm the excitement fluttering in her chest. Around her, people settled in, a mother soothing her baby, a couple arguing quietly, a businessman tapping away on his laptop. It felt like any other flight. When the engines roared to life, the vibration beneath her feet sent a thrill through her. She smiled, watching the ground fall away as the massive jet climbed into the morning sky. Clouds rolled past like cotton fields. 2 hours later, at 38,000 feet, everything changed. It began with a small sound from the cockpit, a faint metallic click over the intercom, followed by silence. No one noticed. Then a slight turbulence hit, just enough to make passengers glance up. The seatbelt sign flickered on. Moments later, a tense voice came over the PA, not the calm tone passengers were used to, but the strained voice of the first officer. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor issue with our captain. Please remain seated." The words were carefully chosen, but the tremor in his voice carried something unspoken. Fear. Elena pulled off her headphones. Her heart began to beat faster. She looked toward the front, but the cockpit door remained locked. A flight attendant rushed past her row, her face pale. Within minutes, the intercom clicked again, but this time, it wasn't the first officer's voice. It was the chief flight attendant trying to sound composed. "If there is any medical professional on board, please press your call button immediately." Gasps filled the cabin. The businessman beside her whispered, "God, that's never good." A few seats back, a doctor stood up and was quickly ushered to the front. Elena could hear murmuring, fragments of words, "Oh, unconscious, impulse, and oxygen." The passengers craned their necks, trying to see, but the cockpit door remained firmly shut. 10 minutes later, the flight attendant returned, her eyes glossy. She leaned down to speak quietly with the co-pilot through the locked door. Whatever was said, it wasn't good. Another announcement came, this time halting, broken. "This is your first officer speaking. Our captain has become incapacitated. We are declaring a medical emergency. Please remain calm." The cabin fell silent. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly in every direction, white and calm, a cruel contrast to the chaos brewing inside. Elena's pulse thundered in her ears. She thought about her mother waiting in Singapore. The plane began to bank slightly, leveling off. The co-pilot was flying alone now, but then, minutes later, another sharp lurch. A drop, people screamed. Drinks spilled. The intercom came alive again, but now the voice was ragged, almost panicked. "This is the first officer. We've lost." Static, then silence. For a terrifying moment, the engines continued to hum, but the aircraft dipped again. A flight attendant stumbled into the aisle, shouting to sit down and fasten seatbelts. The sense of control was gone, replaced by something primal. Fear. Elena's hands trembled. Her phone slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. She could feel her chest tighten. The intercom beeped again, and the chief attendant's trembling voice filled the cabin. "Both pilots are incapacitated. We're attempting to contact ground control. Please stay calm." No one stayed calm. Panic spread like wildfire, crying, praying, shouting. Some passengers tried to get up, others froze. The sound of chaos filled the air, human fear echoing through a steel tube at 35,000 feet. Elena gripped the armrest. Her mind spun. Both pilots? How can that even happen? Then in the middle of the panic, a small voice inside her whispered something impossible. "You can help." It made no sense. She wasn't a pilot. She wasn't even sure how a cockpit door opened. But the voice persisted, quiet yet firm, like instinct. Elena had spent her childhood obsessed with flight simulators. Hours spent at her computer pretending to fly. It was just a game, she'd told herself. But right now, with 2 pilots down, 247 lives depended on someone doing something. She unbuckled her seatbelt. A flight attendant immediately rushed to her. "Miss, please sit." "I can help," Elena said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. The attendant stared at her. "You're a pilot?" "No," Elena admitted. "But I know how to fly and I've trained on simulators. I know how to handle a Boeing." It sounded insane, even to her. But something in her eyes made the attendant hesitate. After a tense pause, she nodded. "Come with me." As they moved forward through the aisle, people stared. Some shouted, "What's happening?" Others just watched, hope flickering where there had been only panic. The cockpit door opened with the emergency override code. Inside, the scene was grim. The captain, an older man in his 50s, was slumped over his seat, oxygen mask dangling. The first officer lay unconscious on the floor, face pale, breathing shallow. The autopilot light blinked and a shrill alarm echoed through the cabin. Elena froze for a second, her mind blank. Then she forced herself to move. She pulled the first officer aside gently, sat down in the captain's seat, and stared at the endless array of buttons, switches, and screens. She had seen this layout 100 times, in simulators and documentaries, even in her dreams. But now it was real. Her voice trembled as she reached for the radio. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 342 from Sydney to Singapore. Both pilots are incapacitated. I repeat, both pilots are down. This is a 19-year-old passenger attempting to take control." Static answered her for a few seconds. Then a voice cut through, urgent and calm. "Flight 342, this is Sydney Center. Identify yourself, Elena Foster." "I'm not a pilot. I've only trained on simulators." A short silence. "Then copy that, Elena. You're doing great. Listen carefully. We're going to help you bring that aircraft down safely." Her hands gripped the yoke. "Roger that." The controller's voice came through again, firm and precise. "Elena, do you have autopilot engaged?" "Yes," she said, scanning the screens. "Autopilot is on. Heading 027. Good, keep it that way for now. Check your altitude. 38,000 feet. Okay. We're going to start a descent soon, but first we need to make sure your engines and fuel are stable." "Look to your left, do you see the fuel indicator?" She found it, nodded, heart pounding. "Fuel stable. Perfect. You're doing just fine, Elena. Stay calm." Behind her, the flight attendant stood frozen, watching in disbelief. A teenager, guiding a Boeing through the sky, her voice steady as the world fell apart. Minutes passed. The calm, rhythmic instructions from air traffic control anchored her, keeping her fear at bay. But the reality of what she was doing slowly began to sink in. She wasn't just flying a plane. She was responsible for 247 lives, mothers, fathers, children, all depending on her. The controller came back on. "Elena, we're coordinating with Singapore ATC. We'll divert you to Darwin for an emergency landing. Can you handle that?" Elena took a deep breath. "I'll try. Good girl. That's all we need. Just try." She adjusted the heading. The aircraft responded smoothly, banking left. Outside the window, the horizon tilted, sunlight reflecting off the wings. A collective gasp rippled through the passengers as the plane turned. But to Elena, it felt like music, the rhythm of trust, the heartbeat of courage. Then the turbulence hit. The plane shuddered violently, alarms blaring. Elena gritted her teeth, pulling the yoke gently to stabilize the pitch. "Sydney Center, I'm experiencing heavy turbulence." "Copy, Elena. Maintain attitude. Don't fight it. Just keep her level." The plane jolted again, throwing a coffee cup across the cockpit. Her hands trembled, sweat forming on her forehead. After a tense minute, the shaking subsided. The calm voice returned. "You did it, Elena. You wrote it out." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear but from sheer disbelief. Back in the cabin, passengers whispered her name. The news had spread. A teenage girl was flying the plane. Some prayed, others watched the cockpit door as if staring at hope itself. Time lost meaning. The sky outside darkened as the sun dipped low on the horizon. Elena's voice grew steadier with each radio call. The once impossible task now felt possible. But as the ground radar appeared on her screen, the controller's tone changed. Calm but urgent. "Elena, we have weather over Darwin. Thunderstorms incoming. You'll need to descend through crosswinds. Are you ready?" She stared at the screen. Clouds towered ahead, dark and alive. Lightning flickered in the distance, her pulse quickened. I'll do my best. That's all anyone can ask. As she prepared to disengage autopilot, the seat beneath her vibrated. The sound of engines adjusting filled her ears. Her hands hovered over the throttle. Flight 342, you are cleared to descend to 10,000 feet. Descending to 10,000, she eased the throttle, watching the altitude indicator drop. The aircraft responded smoothly, until another alarm screamed. Warning, autopilot disconnect. Her stomach dropped. Sydney Center. I've lost autopilot. Copy? The cockpit lights flickered as lightning flashed through the windshield. Elena squinted, her hands gripping the control yoke so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every few seconds, turbulence jolted the aircraft violently. Passengers screamed from behind the locked door. The Boeing 777 trembled like a living creature fighting the wind. Her headset crackled. Elena, this is Sydney Center. You're doing great. Remember, small corrections. Ease your pitch, keep your wings level. She tried to focus on the voice, but the storm outside was deafening. The windshield wipers thudded rhythmically as rain hammered the glass. I can't see anything, she shouted. That's okay, Elena. Trust your instruments. Don't look outside. Fly the numbers. She nodded, more to herself than to him. The attitude indicator glowed blue and brown, sky and ground, her only sense of balance. The aircraft lurched again, alarms shrieking. Stall warning, the system barked. Elena forced her breathing to slow. She remembered every moment spent in front of her computer, every simulator session where she practiced emergency procedures, every crash that had ended with a game over. This time, there was no reset button. She eased the nose down, added thrust. The engines roared in response, stabilizing the jet. Good correction, Elena, came the calm voice over the radio. You just saved us from a stall. Now descend to 5,000. You're almost through the storm. She adjusted the throttle, descending carefully. Her hands trembled, but her focus didn't waver. Each second felt stretched into minutes. She could feel the weight of every life behind her. 247 souls who had no idea what came next. At 8,000 feet, the turbulence began to fade. The storm clouds thinned, revealing streaks of twilight between the darkness. The controller's tone softened. You're clear of the worst, Elena. You did it. We're handing you over to Darwin Approach for landing guidance. A new voice came through, crisp and confident. Flight 342, this is Darwin Approach. Elena, we're honored to have you. We'll get you home safely. Are you ready to land? Her throat felt dry. I think so. Good. We'll walk you through every step. First, check your flaps lever on the center console. Bring it down to position 1. Her fingers moved with uncertain precision. Flaps 1 set, perfect. Now reduce your speed to 250 knots. She eased the throttle, watching the numbers drop on the display. The runway lights appeared faintly through the clouds ahead, a glowing strip of hope in the distance. Passengers behind her whispered prayers. Some held hands. Others stared at the ceiling, eyes closed, tears running silently down their faces. Inside the cockpit, the oxygen mask still hung beside the unconscious captain. Elena glanced at him briefly, his chest rising slowly. He was alive. It gave her strength. Darwin approached to Flight 342. You're lined up on final. Landing gear down. Her hand trembled as she flipped the lever. The sound of gears extending filled the air, followed by a heavy thud. Gear down, she confirmed. Good. Now lower flaps to full and reduce speed to 160 knots. Keep your descent rate at 700 feet per minute. The runway's in sight. Her eyes fixed on the faint lights ahead. I see it. That's your target, Elena. Keep her steady. Her breathing grew shallow. She was so close, but the thought terrified her. The hardest part wasn't over. Landing was where even trained pilots sometimes failed. Darwin Approach, she said softly. What if I don't make it? The voice came back instantly. You will, Elena. You've already done the impossible. Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. Copy that. As the plane descended through the final layer of cloud, the city lights of Darwin came into view, a glittering web against the black sea. The runway lights grew brighter. The passengers could feel the descent now. The engines hummed softly, steady. A few brave souls clapped quietly, whispering, "She's doing it." Flight 342, you're at 1,000 feet, the controller said. Ease your throttle. Keep your nose level. Elena's hands moved in small, controlled motions. Every fiber of her being focused on those glowing lights. The radar altimeter ticked down. 500. The plane trembled slightly. She adjusted. 300. Her heart pounded. 200. She whispered, "Please, not now." 50. She gently pulled back the yoke. The aircraft floated for a second, a perfect pause between life and death. Then the wheels touched down. The landing gear screamed against the tarmac, tires smoking. A moment later, the roar of reverse thrust filled the cockpit. The aircraft slowed, shuddering, until finally, silence. It had stopped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The storm still rumbled in the distance, but inside, time froze. Then the cabin erupted. Cheers, sobs, applause. People cried openly, hugging strangers. Elena sat motionless, staring at the controls. Her hands still shook, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had landed a Boeing 7 Aviation alone. The radio crackled. "Flight 342, welcome to Darwin." The world just witnessed history. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. A tear slipped down her cheek. The cockpit door burst open. Flight attendants rushed in, some crying, some laughing. One knelt beside the captain, checking his pulse. Another hugged Elena from behind, whispering, "You did it, sweetheart. You did it." Outside, emergency vehicles surrounded the jet. Paramedics boarded quickly, tending to the pilots. Reporters and airport staff gathered near the windows, watching in disbelief as word spread through the terminal. A teenage passenger had landed the plane. Elena finally stood, her legs unsteady. The moment she stepped out of the cockpit, the passengers erupted again, clapping and cheering. Many reached out to touch her hand as if to confirm she was real. A small child tugged on her sleeve and said softly, "You're a hero." Elena smiled weakly. "No," she whispered. "I just did what I had to do." She made her way down the aisle, each step heavier than the last. When she finally reached the exit, the night air hit her face. Warm, damp, filled with the scent of rain. Blue and red emergency lights danced across the wet tarmac. As she descended the stairs, her knees nearly gave out. Paramedics caught her arms, steadying her. Cameras flashed. Someone shouted, "Elena Foster, is it true you landed the plane yourself?" She didn't answer. She just looked up at the massive aircraft towering behind her, the machine she had somehow kept in the sky. Hours later, in a small room inside the terminal, she sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping water. Her hand still trembled. Across the table sat two investigators, gentle but curious. "Elena," one of them said, "you have no pilot's license, correct?" She nodded. "Just simulator experience. And you've never taken an actual flight lesson?" "Never." He exchanged a stunned glance with his partner. "Then tell me, how did you know what to do?" She looked down, her voice soft but firm. I just listened. And I remembered everything I'd ever learned. Every video, every manual, every time I failed in the simulator. It all mattered tonight." The investigator smiled faintly. "You understand what you did, right? You saved 247 lives." Her eyes filled again. "No," she said. "We saved each other. They believed in me. That's why I couldn't give up." The door opened and one of the pilots, the captain, entered, pale but alive. He was using an oxygen tube, his movements slow. When he saw Elena, he smiled weakly. "I owe you my life," he said. She stood, speechless. He extended his hand, but instead of shaking hers, he pulled her into a hug. "You were born for this," he whispered. News spread within hours. Every major outlet across the globe carried the headline, "Teen passenger lands jetliner after both pilots collapse." Airlines, aviation experts, and pilots around the world called it a miracle. Aviation schools reached out, offering Elena full scholarships. NASA even sent a letter of admiration. But Elena didn't care for fame. She returned home quietly, away from cameras, needing silence after the chaos. For days she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the clouds, the lightning, the trembling yoke in her hands. Yet somewhere deep inside, she felt changed, as if a part of her had awakened that she never knew existed. A week later, a letter arrived at her doorstep. It was from one of the passengers, an elderly woman named Margaret, who had been sitting just 3 rows behind her. It read, "You didn't just land that plane. You gave us all a reason to believe that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when it matters most." Elena folded the letter and smiled. Months passed. The story became legend, a tale of courage, instinct, and faith. But for Elena, it wasn't about being remembered. It was about the quiet moment somewhere above the clouds when fear met courage, and courage won. Years later, Elena did become a pilot. She trained under some of the best instructors in the world, earning her wings. And every time she took off, she'd glance at the seat beside her, the captain's seat, and remember that day when the world went silent, and she found her voice. And when asked in interviews or classrooms what she thought about that fateful flight, she always said the same words: courage isn't about being ready. It's about standing up when no one else can.